So, hi, Brandy.
Hi, Charlie.
Here we are a few weeks down the road,
Yes.
and we've all got etched on our calendar the looming date of May 11th or June 8th, which are the
Yep.
two dates when life is supposed to resume back to normal.
Yeah. So let's talk about normal.
Yeah.
uh, I think that's part of where we all get hung up on this, right? We had a normal before all of this, and um, really kind of across the board, no matter where you're coming from, that has changed. Some more, some less, some radically, some in positive directions, right? Either way, we were all forced to adapt. And now we're all facing another adaptation. And I think it's just important that we recognize there's a lot of different ways to take this. And maybe even a mix of all of them. So we were talking a little bit earlier about the kinds of ways that people are taking it. And I liked some of the different categories you were coming up from, your kind of anecdotal observations of
Well,
how
I
people are
just
handling it.
yeah, through talking to various people, I was saying, I've seen three really categories. There's the hopeful, that this is all behind us and it's going to be an exciting, bright new world. There's those who are slightly afraid. They're kind of fearful about this upcoming adaptation phase. And there are those who've actually, I daren't say thrived, but have done really well in lockdown, have had time to spend time with themselves, with their families, found a rhythm that suited them, and frankly aren't really willing to, or not willing, but aren't looking forward
Reluctant,
to
yeah.
giving this up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, and for many people, they may even vacillate between all of those,
Yeah.
right? In some ways, you kind of look forward to, maybe getting back to the gym or going out, or there might be other facets where it's like, well, we've had our moments, but there've been some silver linings of our togetherness. I've been more present for things. And for other people, the togetherness has brought out, really difficult times that are quite confronting, and they're really ready to go back to anything that feels quote unquote normal.
Mm.
And all of that is that range, and everything in between is kind of the range of the human adaptation to change. And change is hard. Good, bad, and different. And honestly, we don't really know what this change holds. And for some people, it's going to be viewed as hopeful, others maybe dreadful, right? And other people might be reluctant, not because they're afraid of what lies ahead, but because they are mourning that, hey, there were some things that I liked about this. And so it's hard to figure out, how to face this, how to approach this, how to deal with the certainty and uncertainty and all of the in between, and what kind of things help us in these times of adaptation. We know from the realm of psychology that, our different coping styles and emotion regulations can really change the experience of these times. And what we're not really talking about is the collective trauma that people are experiencing. It's not like an acute trauma, like a car accident or, an assault or something that someone's experienced, but a more diffuse one, right? And part of figuring out the next steps is making sense of what happened. And I don't think that enough time has gone by that we really have been able to all make sense of it all.
Right. And I think that is true. And I think for some people, this has been a very real experience, either themselves or people nearby have been ill with COVID-19, and they've actually seen the aftermath and the effects and all of that. And for others, I was talking to somebody today who said, well, I actually don't know anybody who was affected
Yeah.
by this. And so, you know, they kind of feel, uh, was it real? You know,
Yeah, it's
what was that all
abstract
about?
when you don't have that human connection to it. I mean, how fortunate to be in that position. But at the same time, we have such varied experiences with all of this. And how do we kind of come back together and rebuild our sense of community, our sense of belonging to one another, when even just the way that we interact is different, right? Um, we're not going back to normal. I think that's one thing that I can't stress enough, is that um, one of the things that we can do to increase our resilience right now is um, bringing an element of curiosity to these next steps forward, bringing moments of reflection and evaluation. um, okay, um, these are the things that worked or didn't work for me during the time of closure. What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your family, your friends, whatever dynamics? What things have helped? What things have been difficult, right? And looking at what you're being asked to do in the steps forward and figuring out, okay, what am I needing, right? So people who have suddenly become unemployed, for example, right? It can be an extraordinarily scary time, like, going back to normal. What is that? I don't, this is a brave new world of job exploration. So, I was happy to see that, there's some online offerings for job seekers right now, so that we can start to build up, okay, what are the next steps for you? Because, we don't have all the answers as to what the impacts are going to be, how it's going to work for each individual, and evaluate what kind of things you want to pull forward. So if you have taken a step back from work, um, and you have the position to make that choice to flex your hours, be gentle about your transition going back. If you're able to have something that's more similar to what you've been doing, so that all of the changes don't come at once, then that's something worth consideration. It's hard because we can't really give blanket cookie cutter advice for people, because everyone's kind of dealing with something slightly different.
Yeah.
And
I think what I've been hearing are people who are dealing with the frustration that maybe their companies are saying, okay, you're going to be back in the office and it's going to be back to normal. And they're like, well, whoa, wait, this home office was working for me. Let's talk, let's try and figure this out. There isn't a
yeah,
2 meter distance to the desk next to me. And some people are saying to me, I'm scared. I'm
yeah,
scared of going back.
yeah,
What if something?
exactly. And I think, we can't unknow some of the things that we know, right? Some of the things when this first started, right, many of us were fairly laxed with, because we just didn't know. And as the information came in, it's like, oh, well, we can't do that. We need to do it this way. And we can't do that. As each different piece of information came in, we're trying to adapt. Now, I think most people got to like an information overload point where they had to say, okay, I'm going to stop or at least slow down the amount of information I'm taking in, because it could be quite overwhelming if you're taking in every piece of information. But we're going to have to do the same thing kind of in reverse, right? We kind of put on the brakes and now we can't just put it on the gas.
Yeah,
So we have to kind of say, okay, what are we going to do to slowly take off the brakes? And I think that's part of the strategy that they're taking here is, we're going to try and gradually take off the brakes and see, and also give faith that everyone here can make wise choices for themselves. But that does put also the onus on individuals to look at their specific situations and to work more collaboratively and creatively in their work environments, home environments, school environments, to say, okay, how are we going to do this? Because only we know how this classroom looks. Only we know how this office is set up. And addressing the very real anxieties that people have. right, there are going to also be people who have anxieties above and beyond what the regulations require. And I think it's important to recognize if you find a hard time coping with adjusting to going back, as a good sign that you need to reach out and talk to someone, either a professional or even just a friend, so that you can kind of walk through, okay, here are my concerns, here's what I have control over, here's what I don't have control over, and really slowing down the thought process so you're not spinning out with your thoughts, getting overly concerned. And oftentimes for many people, processing that with another person is helpful. Kind of getting it outside of your head and looking at it with another person could be helpful. Of course, speaking with a professional about it if you're really struggling. We know that this emotion regulation is a big factor to adaptation, right? Can we regulate our emotions? What coping skills we use, how we use them, how it influences our social connections. But the determinant of when it's like kind of meets a threshold is some people do not have that emotion regulation to handle these bigger adaptive adjustments. And we're asking a lot of adjustments pretty
Yeah.
rapidly.
I was going to say it actually all sounds very grown up to me.
Yeah.
I don't think I can actually process in that sense. I mean, you do things kind of just naturally. But the word I picked up from you was the word being in control. And I think that through this whole thing, we have had to surrender our control.
Yeah.
And now having to get back into situations where we're going to have to exercise as citizens, but we are still being told how to do a lot of things. You're having wear masks, keep a distance, there's a lot of things that aren't going to be there anymore. And I think for a lot of people, it's also that sense of, again, not being in control. And that is what's scary.
Yeah. And sometimes it's very helpful to recognize this is what I have control over
Yeah.
and this is what I distinctly don't. And when you find yourself getting preoccupied with things that you don't, this is a good time to lean into your social relationships, right? Because this is a moment not to fight against these things because they are out of your control, but to be seen and heard that is really hard, that is extraordinarily difficult. And while we can't change the things that are beyond our control, we can definitely change the feeling of belonging, the feeling of unity in that process of like, I don't like not having answers to that question either. And I don't like not knowing what my summer plans are either.
Yeah.
And what will that entail? And what lies in the future. We all wish we had answers to a lot of these questions, and it's important that we reflect but also lean into the social relationships that we've developed through this. One of the most adaptive things that we can do is to lean into our social relationships, and I'm not just talking about friends here or family. I'm talking about speaking with colleagues, speaking with decision makers about your transition coming back, being proactive and advocating the facets of what you see as feasible, what you see as sustainable. If you've found facets of working from the home office helpful, reflect that back. That's a helpful consideration to keep in mind, as I'm sure that business owners have to make decisions as to kind of where people go and how they manage these things, and leaning in on those kinds of conversations, because we're all going to have to sort it out, but we're all dealing with a slightly different puzzle. So the pieces are not going to necessarily fit from my puzzle to yours.
Yeah, totally. I think also the notion, just to go back to it and restate it, of admitting that this is a traumatizing time.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing trauma because it's not over yet.
a complex trauma. It's also really abstract
Yeah.
and diffuse for a lot of people. Now, some people have an actual traumatic loss, right, from this. Many people do. Um, but there's also many people who are affected by this, that uh, it's just this broader experience that we're having,
Mm.
right? And many people are recognizing some of the symptoms of it, you know, a little bit fatigued, you know, everything just kind of exhausts me. I'm working half the hours, but somehow I'm twice done at the end of the day. You know, we hear, at least you know, in my line of work, hear a lot about bad dreams coming up for a lot of people. So, you know, nightmares, or just generally bad dreams, or restless sleep, um, not feeling kind of mentally completely there, a little bit foggy. And these are all, or can be all, signs either of depression or of trauma, or what we believe is going on right now, a collective trauma, which is kind of more diffuse. And if you have a trauma history, all the more important to stay attuned to those symptoms, as they may feel different from the trauma symptoms that you've experienced in the past. But they
Right.
might bring up some of those old traumas.
So that would be really good if we could actually ask, you know, send me or give me a list of what people can look out for, as to be able to identify that maybe, you
Sure,
know,
we could
they
put
are
that in
being
the show
affected.
notes for
And
sure.
and what can people do about this? Like how can,
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind is we're still consider this the pre-trauma stage. So even though people are feeling symptoms, the actual trauma that for most people on these kinds of complex traumas that comes up is when they go back to life as normal, and they are confronting that life is not going to be the same.
hmm,
That the that confrontation is actually when a lot of people have the hardest time. So as we were talking about, you know, these buffers of going slower, being conscious of what's helping you remain kind of healthy and stable, what's working for each of your family members, for example, which may be different, and evaluating what kind of easing back can be helpful. And also a processing of the, okay, this was different than expected. um, Now, for some people, going kind of straight into that narrative will be helpful. So, you know, processing it as they notice it. For other people, it'll be just taking it slowly and reflecting um, over time, you know, maybe gradually, maybe later on. And other people may need, you know, a professional to help them deal with the immediate kind of coping with significant losses. For some people, their financial picture is going to be changed. For our community, you know, at the Lilly Center, you know, with many people's work being connected with their residency here, that also can be something destabilizing in their life. So we want to reiterate the sense of community, that if, regardless of what you're struggling with, if it's something that you feel overwhelmed with, or you feel like you don't know where to go, what the next steps are, how to even address what has happened, maybe you don't even understand what just happened, um, that leaning into kind of the social connections and supports, whether that's your friends or family or our community that we have at the center, is a really great way to start to make sense of what has transpired and what lays ahead.
yeah,
Um, and that's kind of why we do what we do. That's what we're here for each other.
exactly. Um, and just as of note, we will be reopening the center in stages. So May 11th, the HSK English School will reopen. So we'll have the kids there, and the information coffee morning will be either at the center or via Zoom. You know, again, we want to meet people where they are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then June 8th, we're hoping to be able to run a lot more of our programs, as that is what, you know, we're following the guidance from the government. So June 8th will be when hopefully the center will be up and running as much as possible. So that's important. But, you know, we are available. We're on Zoom. people can just email us. There's always somebody who's willing to talk, to listen. Yeah. I just have one quick thought. What about kids? Because, you know, our kids are going back to school next week.
Yeah.
And my daughter certainly has a lot of questions as to, you know, what to expect. And I'm sure other kids and their parents
Yeah.
too.
And we see it so wildly different for each canton, so it's hard, hard to make sense of it all. I think what's important to recognize is kids have had some real significant losses. They did not know what they were getting into. For many of them, they didn't understand what was going on, and they're still in the process of making sense of what's going on. Similar to adults, some of them have done well and adapted, and it may be actually a loss letting go of things that they enjoyed, whether that was more time at home, more time with their parents. For other people, it has been, a wild roller coaster of at home learning. And understandably, most kids are going to have the highest priority to reconnect with their friends. And I think most schools are quite cognizant of this, that children really just need to have this time to socially regulate, to come back together, to realize their friends are still there, to realize their friends still care about them, to realize their teachers are still there and their teachers still care about them. So I hope most schools are using this as a time to focus less on academic catch-up and more on coming in and making sense of, wow, that was really strange. How was it for you? And having a time for us to reconcile, also for us to recognize that for many people, they may have suffered more. And to identify those students and those children who need additional support right now. So I think it's going to be much more a act of listening than an act of guidance for the kids. For some kids, they're just going to want it to go back to normal. And from the way I've seen and heard, many of these classrooms are not going to necessarily be run the same way as they have been. And so I think talking with your kids about what you do know, okay, we're going to try this out. This is how we're going to do it now. And let them go, oh, okay, that's weird, or I don't really like that, or I don't want to do that, or let them express some of the different emotions that they're having, because they're just like any human being trying to make sense of what's going on. For many of the kids in the local schools, it's going to be different than at the international schools. And I think it's important that they, regardless of which school environment they're going back to, that the adults in their lives are just listening to how they're doing with this adjustment. This is a really important time to kind of see what output your kids are giving. So both in preparation this week for them going back, talking about what's going to happen is helpful across the board, whether they're, toddlers and maybe you're just talking to them about going back to Kita, or if they're, teenagers and they're contemplating like, oh, I don't know, I kind of more or less, got used to the idea of not going back. Now we might go back for a week or so, or a couple of weeks. So I think it's important, regardless, to talk about what their expectations are. It gives you an opportunity to set the tone. And then as we do transition back, just listening and seeing what their output is. Are they having a hard time coming back? And what is that? Is that a mismatch in their expectations? Do they have things that they haven't processed from all of this? Are they angry? Are they sad? So I think it's going to be an observation we're all going to have to do of one another of, okay, how is this going for you? Because this is like the change to slowing down. We're letting off the brakes. We're kind of going back into the groove of things. And one of the things that might be helpful is checking in of like, okay, what things are the same and what things are different, you know, and giving them an opportunity to reflect. Yeah, you're right. Some things are the same and some things are different. And it gives, especially young children, language for giving voice to that experience, that some things are rather similar and familiar, and other things feel like they're not going to change, or they maybe are, you know, a new way of doing things. And it's nice to open up that conversation.
Excellent. Brandy, thank you. This has
Yeah.
been really, really helpful. And I hope that our audience also gets value from this. And just remember to take a deep breath. And we're all in this
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, we'll connect you to some of the resources to, you know, see about how each of us are doing. Take good care of yourselves, take good care of one another. And we're going to have to get through this together, just like we have so far.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Carly.